Hi, I'm Mark Andrew Nowen, and I'd like to read a couple of excerpts from the book The Evolution of Faith by Quaker minister Philip Gulley. Usually I write blogs, type them out on my computer, but I don't have a computer right now, so I thought that I would do a video blog, which I guess would be titled Pessimistic versus Optimistic Religion this time around. The problem with pessimism. More than anything else, negative religion rejects an optimistic view of humanity. For negative religion hinges on the belief that humanity is fallen and evil, in need of a Savior, who intervenes in history to save us from our sin. How odd that the foundation of any religion should be the utter rejection of our innate capacity for good. I remember touching on this subject during a speech I was giving at a respected Midwestern university. Members of the local chapter of the Campus Crusade for Christ had turned out in high numbers, and after my remarks they hurried to the audience microphones in an effort to dominate the question and answer session that followed. Though the purpose of the exercise was to engage in conversation, it quickly became a revival atmosphere, as student after student stood and rejected a positive view of humanity, disparaging our capacity for good, urging those present to turn from sin and accept Jesus so they could be saved. It soon became clear our hoped-for conversation couldn't happen so long as they dominated the microphones. So I asked them to nominate one of their peers to ask 3 questions which I would answer, then give others of a different theological bent an opportunity to ask questions or make observations. During the next hour, I watched the give and take between 2 groups of persons whose views were radically different. Curiously, I observed that many who argued for a positive view of humanity were elderly, had lived through the Great Depression and World War II, or had witnessed many tragic and evil situations, yet still bore eloquent testimony to the human capacity for loving kindness. The younger people had been the recipient of parental love and concern, had never known want or war, enjoyed the blessings of advanced health care, and were attending one of the finest universities in the nation, but were utterly convinced that the humans who had sacrificed and worked to make all those blessings possible were intrinsically depraved. Coincidentally, I would later meet the parents of some of these students, many of whom expressed dismay at their children's conversion to fundamentalist faith. It was as if they targeted my son, one mother told me. It was his first time away from friends and family. He was lonely. Then along came a group of instant friends who convinced him that the religion he'd grown up with was wrong. I can readily understand how those who are needy, who have suffered evil, loss, or want, can become pessimistic and jaded. What I do not understand is how those who have known material and familial blessing could be so cynical as those young students. The only possible explanation for such irrational fanaticism is the unthinking fervor integral to negative religion. Because their worldview is rooted in religion, because it strikes at the heart of what it means to be human, their passionate belief in humanity's evil is considered a virtue, not a vice. That is, the more they believe in their own depravity and the depravity of others, the more they will be applauded for their devotion to God. This is the inverted nature of negative religion. It applauds what should be soundly rejected and rejects what should be roundly affirmed. Worse than that, pessimistic religion by its very nature is ill-prepared to help humanity deal with our most intractable problems. Because negative religion views humans as intrinsically evil and ultimately incapable of good, it offers little hope for our future, save for the intervening action of an all-powerful God who, if you will forgive me for saying so, seems curiously unable or unwilling to insert herself in time and space to rectify our problems. In short, pessimistic religion is quick to point out our failures, hastens to remind us of our inability to solve them on our own, then demands we place our faith and trust in a deity of its own invention, whose track record for alleviating human suffering is spotty. Why the moral, logical, and spiritual bankruptcy of this dismal worldview is not readily discerned and acknowledged by otherwise intelligent persons is beyond me. The rejection of human goodness, resourcefulness, and power, coupled with a belief in a celestial rescuer, hinders our ability to face our problems squarely, assess our challenges realistically, and overcome them creatively and decisively. In that sense, negative religion is the enemy of human progress. Those who hold such views should be treated graciously, but their religion should be recognized for what it is, an outdated, implausible, superstitious faith, whose contributions to the modern world are negligible, whose harm is substantial. Whenever it dominates a culture, people are diminished, progress is scorned, and prejudice is sanctified, all in the name of God, whose goodness comes always at the expense of human virtue. By this I mean that for God to be a rescuer, humans have to be fallen and corrupt, in need of a savior. Thus, in negative religion, it is logically impossible for both God and humanity to be simultaneously virtuous. Those who believe that religion should uplift our spirits and expand our minds should soundly reject any religion that asserts such a bleak and twisted view of human nature. And a section that he calls optimism as a spiritual virtue. I was once speaking on the topic of spiritual optimism, and during the question and answer session, a man stood and accused me of being naive, offering a litany of evidence confirming humankind's depravity. While it isn't my custom to argue back, I invited the man to consider the difference between naivete and optimism. Naivete has to do with being uninformed and inexperienced. In matters of the human condition and faith, I am neither. I am 50 years old, have pastored over half of my life, and am well acquainted with human sin and evil, my own and others. I am not naive, but I am optimistic. In my life, I have witnessed countless acts of grace, have seen many lives transformed by the power of good, and have observed evil and hatred overcome by mercy and decency. I can count on one hand the persons I have met whom I believe were truly evil, whose wickedness could not be explained by maltreatment, but I could fill entire books with the names of persons whose charity and compassion were deeply inspiring. Spiritual optimism is a recurring theme in the lives of the deeply spiritual persons I've met. They not only believe the best things about God, but they are convinced of humanity's capacity for good. While not blind to human failings, they remain positive about our progress and potential. Many years ago, I was visiting an older gentleman. A retired pastor, he had served several congregations well and faithfully, helping them become rich, life-giving communities. He was over 90 years old, but still possessed a bright, quick mind. I would drop in on him occasionally to engage in theological discussions. So, I asked him, when we were both settled in our chairs in front of his fireplace, were we born sinners? We wasted little time on niceties and usually got right to the point. He grew quiet, thinking, then said, and I'm paraphrasing because our conversation was held so long ago, I believe in evolution. I believe each species adapts to its environment in order to better thrive. We aren't born sinners. We are born incomplete and immature. The goal of each generation is to advance our human growth and evolution. It's a long process, but an unstoppable one. He went on to discuss the progress in the span of his lifetime, citing the growth in knowledge, the awareness of our global connectedness, and the efforts to create governments that benefited many, not the few. It is a slow process, he said again, but if you compare where we are now with where we were several hundred years ago, you can't help but be an optimist. I challenged him, citing wars and greed and human suffering. He readily acknowledged those things, but held to his conviction that humanity was moving in a positive direction, that our concern about war, want, and selfishness was itself proof of an evolving morality. During the course of our conversation, my worldview shifted. Because I was raised hearing the Church's steady drumbeat of human fault and failure, I had assumed our corrupted nature was an undeniable fact, the necessary starting point for Christian theology. I believed that that was an indisputable element of the gospel and could not be questioned. But listening to this wise man was a revelation to me. We were not born into sin. We were born incomplete and immature, slowly and inevitably working our way toward a more evolved state. Gone was the judgment, the urgent need that our first words to God be apologetic, the abject sense of failure. All of that was replaced with a warm gratitude for the spiritual and moral progress of our ancestors, and a healthy desire to creatively further our ethical evolution. This proved to be a spiritual breakthrough for me. My faith, which had often felt like an onerous, relentless burden, became infused with peace and joy and lightness. Around the same time, I happened upon a quote from the Quaker writer and teacher Elton Trueblood, who said pastors ought to always be working themselves out of a job. I presume that Trueblood meant that pastors ought to be equipping others for lives of compassion and grace, and to be doing that so ably that their own presence would no longer be required in a specific community. Perhaps that is also true for God. When we perceive ourselves as sinners in need of salvation, then God will always be needed to rescue us. We will always require a God to save us from our sin. But if God is the universal and inward impulse that inspires us to seek the best for others and the growth of the beloved, then when we have learned to do that for ourselves, when we have evolved to that fuller awareness, then God might well have worked herself out of a job. Perhaps when we are fully evolved, we will no longer require a deity's assistance, for we will embody the attributes and goals toward which God has called us. We will be, in every sense of the word, grown up. Is it too scandalous to believe that a spirit of optimism might well lead us not only toward a fuller humanity, but toward a fuller divinity, when we need look no further than let me start that again. Is it too scandalous to believe that a spirit of optimism might well lead us not only toward a fuller humanity, but toward a fuller divinity, when we need look no further than within to see the face of God? I'll end off for now, and I hope that you have a good day.